So what we're ultimately aiming for is being able to have a page where we can see the detail of a full blog post. So in this case, you can see on the finished website, it's /blog/3, which happens to be the ID of this particular blog. And you can see it's got all the information there. And it's just a little bit a way to separate that blog post to have its own thing. Like someone could link to this blog post, you could share it with someone. And so how do we do that inside of Django? Like, how do we have URLs that have numbers that could change, right? Like what if they want blog 1, 2, or 3? We can't go to our urls.py and say, this is blog 1, 2, 3. Like that file would get massive. So what we need to do is go into the urls.py for blog. Make sure you're inside of the blog app, okay? And I'm not even in the blog app. Here we go. I want this urls.py. Again, I need to close out some windows. And what I'm going to do, right now we just have one for the home page of the blogs. Let's go ahead and make one so that when someone says blog/3, for instance, like we had over there, that we can actually see what blog post it is that they're talking about. So I'm going to copy the path that we have, go ahead and paste it down below. So we're hoping to have something like, 3 here. And instead of all blogs, I'm going to have this be called detail. And the name here is just going to be detail. All right, so with this in place, how is it that we can take a custom number rather than just always the number 3? Because like if we did this, we'd have to copy and say, here's what happens if they do it for 1, then 2, then 3, and it would get nasty. Instead, what we do is inside of these quotes, we're going to do an angled bracket, and we're going to say int : and we're going to say blog _ID, and then we'll do an ending slash here. Now, what the heck just happened? What is this? Basically, this says when someone comes to this urls.py file, which they come here if they did a /blog, it's going to say, is there any path in this URL that is an int? And there's different options you can put here. Like you can do string for this one. There's another type that's called slug. You can look at the Django documentation, but this says if anybody enters a integer after blog, I want you to represent that integer with the name blog ID and then pass it forward to this detail. So let me just show you. If we now make a function with the name detail, so I'm going to go to the views, make a new function here. I'm going to call it def detail. Not only do I have request here, but also I pass in the name of whatever variable name we gave here. In this case, blog ID. So I'm going to copy this, paste that in there, still do my colon. And I've got to do a return, render. We're going to pass in the request. And we got to give some sort of name here. So I'm going to say blog /detail.html. And then I'm going to do comma. And then we'll pass forward, just for the time being, I'm going to say ID is going to be equal to whatever blog ID is. Okay, so we're going to pass forward that piece of information. So if we go ahead and save this, and then we make a new template here that's called detail.html. So I'm going to right click. I'm going to say new file, detail.html. Okay, inside of here, I simply just want to show what's inside of ID. So I'm just going to put, boom, ID just like that, right? Because here I said I'm going to pass forward something with the key of ID, and it's going to hold whatever blog ID is. So if we do this, and I go to /blog/5, look what happens. The number 5 shows up. What if I put in some big number? That's fine. It passes through. And what's going on? When this URL comes to Django, first, it goes to this top level urls.py and it says, oh, there's a blog inside of it. I'm going to pass it forward to the blog URLs. So then it comes to this URL and it says, okay, there's more than nothing there. In fact, there's a number there. So I'm going to pass this forward to detail. So then it goes to the views and it says, okay, here's detail and the blog ID, the int that they passed in. I'm going to then send that forward to the detail.html and then ultimately we display that. Okay, that's like the full path of it. Now you may be wondering, well, how do we show the actual blog, not just the ID of a particular blog, right? Like if someone passes in the number 1, I want to see the information for that very first blog post. So the way to do that is in fact in the views. So we've learned how to grab all the objects from a database, or in this case, the top 5 objects from a database. How do we grab one particular object? Well, the code that we want for this is up after render, we're going to do a comma, and we're going to say get underscore object underscore or underscore 404. Okay, so this particular function says it's going to try and get an object. If it can't find it, it's going to give us back a 404 page, which if you haven't heard of the 404, it's basically does not exist. If you ever hit a website and you get the 404, that meant you tried to access a page that didn't exist for them. Like there was no path matching what you were looking for. So in this case, we're trying to get a particular blog. So we'll say blog is equal to capital blog, or excuse me, I did this out of order. We want to do that. Get object or 404. We're going to pass in the name of the class that we're looking for, which in this case is the blog. And then we're going to say PK, which is short for primary key. And the primary key basically just means the ID of the object in the database. Primary key is a very database term. It basically, again, means that ID. But we're going to say PK is equal to blog underscore ID. Okay? So what this does is it tries to grab the particular object for that ID, and if it can, it puts it in there. If not, it returns a 404 page. So we're going to pass forward this blog. So I'm going to change this to be lowercase blog and then pass forward the whole blog. And if this works, inside of the detail, I'm going to show, for example, the blog.title. Okay? So I'm going to save this, come back, reload this page. Look at that. It showed the name for that blog. If I change this to like number 3, it shows the name for the blog which has an ID of 3. Now watch this. If I put in some random number, we definitely don't have a blog with this ID, and hit enter on this, that's when we get the 404 page that says, hey, I wasn't able to handle this. So there's some custom coding that you can do that if you make your 404 page a lot more friendlier than what you see here. But that's some good functionality to say that, hey, if we can't find in the database, because if we didn't have that get object or 404, like we could try and get that one particular object, but then we'd have to write all this custom code if it didn't work, because if we don't write anything custom around it, the website would crash, and bad news for that situation. But let's go back to a blog that does exist, like number 3. That's great. The question is now, how do we link it so that someone can just simply click on one of these blog titles here and it will take us to that particular blog? Well, we got to go back to our all blogs here, and we're going to wrap this H2 inside of an A tag. So we'll do an opening and an ending one here, okay? We want to set the href on this. Now there's a couple of things that I want you to notice here, okay? So whenever we're referring to a URL that has an ID with it, there's a couple of things that we'll have to do. So the first one, let's do the stuff that we know first. So we're going to do our curly brackets with the percentage signs, and we're going to say URL, and then provide inside of here detail, right? Because that's the name of what we're looking for. If we go back to our URLs here, right? We gave it the name of detail. So we want it to go to the detail URL, and then we have to pass forward after that string some sort of number. In this case, we want it to be the blog's ID. So this blog object that we're looping through all the blogs, we're going to say blog.id. So that, this would be like 1, 2, 3, 4 each time you're looping through, okay? Now with this is not going to work. So for example, if I save this and come back, try and reload this, well, okay, technically it works because I'm missing one thing here. So hoorah, this thing does work. But a really good practice is inside of your URLs for the blog app, you should add a variable here called app_name, and then set this equal to the name of your app, which in this case is like blog. So if we do this, and then I go back and try and reload this page, now I get an issue because it says, hey, I don't know what you're talking about here. And the way to fix this is we've got to go back to our all blogs and say now blog : and then have the detail there. So then if we reload this homepage, now this will work. So you may be wondering, why did we go through this extra step? Well, it just kind of goes with that idea that you could have a website with lots of different apps. Like, let's say you had a detail page for both blog and portfolio. If they had the same name, Django would just pick the first one that it found, which may not necessarily be the one that you wanted it to. By specifying here the app name of blog, then anytime we want to reference one of these URLs, we have to say blog, colon, and then that particular name. And it just keeps things that much safer. All right. So I know this has been a long website, but it's just getting that and that much cooler. We have a little bit of styling and functionality to add here. So there's just a little bit that I want to add before we get into Bootstrap. So we're going to walk through that. It's just a little bit of polish, and then we'll go into Bootstrap and make this thing look beautiful like we saw over here. I mean, beauty's in the eye of the beholder, but I really like this.